Forums with the candidates for office for November 8th that is being brought to you by KU Community College and the Citizen. I'm your moderator, Guy Cosentino. On November 8th, voters across the nation get to vote for members of the United States Senate and all 435 members of the House of Representatives. But here in New York, all the members of the legislature are up, all 63 members of the Senate, as well as 150 members of the New York State Assembly. KU County currently has 3 senators representing it, but with the 2020 census, all of KU County is now within 1 Senate district, which is the 48th. The new district will be called the 48th. That includes all of KU County, as well as the village of Skaneateles and the city of Syracuse. And tonight we are happy to bring you 2 of the 3 candidates running for that Senate district. We have Senator Rachel May, who holds the current 53rd Senate district, and Onondaga County legislator Julie Abbott, who is running against her this year. Conservative candidate Justin Coretti could not attend our forum due to his work commitments, but we are delighted to have both in the studio. They are being joined by Jeremy Boyer, the executive editor of The Citizen, and as a point of personal privilege, we'll say that his newspaper, it was announced today, won the Journalists Association of New York's 2021 Newspaper of Distinction. So congratulations to you and your team that were awarded this on Saturday night. And as I said, our candidates are sitting here in the studio. Senator Rachel May will be going first with her opening statement, followed by legislator Abbott. So we'll start with 2-minute statements. We have Ian, a second-year student here at the college. We'll wave you off when you're at 1.5 minutes. He'll hold up a placard when it's 2 minutes. And I will hopefully have you finish your statements, and then we'll move on. Senator May, welcome. As I said, you are on the Democratic and Working Families Party line. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Guy. I appreciate it. And hello, everyone. I am Rachel May. I represent the 53rd Senate District, and I'm excited to run in the new 48th Senate District and hope to represent Cayuga, the whole county of Cayuga, and much of Onondaga County in the state legislature. I have a real record of accomplishment in the legislature. I have passed a lot of legislation that was really important. When I came in 2019, we immediately passed new voting laws for the state of New York, which had some of the worst voting laws in the country before that. We passed the strongest climate bill of any state in the country. We passed the Reproductive Health Act and much more. And as chair of the Aging Committee, I have been very active in trying to improve our long-term care system. I'm particularly proud that as of October 1st, home care workers are receiving $2 more as a minimum wage than they were receiving before. We're hoping, and that will go up another $1 next year. We're hoping that that will enable more home care workers to stay on the job and attract more workers into the job so that more New Yorkers can age with dignity at home and their loved ones don't have to quit their job to care for someone in their home as well. So I also am chair of the Commission on Rural Resources and have worked hard on things like rural broadband and the opioid crisis in rural areas. But my biggest achievement, I think, is making sure that the legislature is really paying attention to upstate and upstate's concerns. And that's how we got all the infrastructure funding, the education funding, all of the building blocks that allowed Micron to make its decision to move here. So I do feel like we have been standing up for New York State, standing up for upstate New York, and I am eager to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We'll now hear from Onondaga County legislator Julie Abbott, who is running on the Republican line. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm Julie Abbott. I'm currently an Onondaga County legislator serving the phenomenal 6th district. It's 5 rural towns and 3 villages, and I absolutely love what I do. But first and foremost, I'm a mom of 5 boys. I lost one of my children, but he's my guy. So I say I have 4 boys on earth and 1 always with me, by my side steering me. So I grew up in Connecticut. I had my first job when I was in 3rd grade, peddling newspapers on a Sunday out of the back of my dad's station wagon. I've always worked. I attended SU, and I absolutely loved it here. I didn't even know it snowed at the time, and I've made it my home here. I had 4 jobs and 3 student loans when I was there. I'm a workhorse, and I'm very proud of what I've done. I was a journalist at News Channel 9 for years, And I was fortunate enough to be able to stay home with my kids, but I'm not really good when I'm not working towards a cause. And so I'm a serial volunteer. I started doing a ton of volunteerism, and it also led me to run for my school board where I live. I saw inequity in funding. I saw a bunch of different things that I thought I could make a difference, and I loved it. So I ran and served several terms. I was the vice president. And then Ryan McMahon, our county executive, came knocking, and he said to me, I have an opening on the legislature. Would you be interested? And I told him, you know me, I'm no yes woman. You probably don't want me if you want a rubber stamp, but if you want to hear what's going on out in our part of the county, including the Owasco Lake watershed, which is in my legislative district, if you want to know, I'm happy to do it. And if I like it, then I'll run. And I have to tell you, I absolutely love what I do. You can totally make a difference working in county politics, and I love what I do. I chaired Health and Human Services throughout the pandemic, and I am super proud of the job we did over in Onondaga County. What you're going to get this year, if you live where I live, is the highest tax cut since 2012. That's what we do at the county. And why I'm fed up with New York State and I'm running is because what you've gotten from my opponent, Senator May, is another record tax increase at the state level. They are completely out of touch with upstate, in my opinion, and that's why I'm running.
All right, thank you. We'll now turn to Jeremy Boyer, who will have questions for both of you. He can ask of both. If it's for both, we'll flip back and forth who goes first and second. And then he can ask individual questions. If it's for an individual member, we will let the opponent follow up with a 1-minute follow-up. So, Mr. Boyer, welcome, and again, congratulations on your papers award.
Thank you so much, and thanks to both of you for coming out here today and making time to answer some questions. It's going to be a challenge to get through all the big issues, but we'll do our best to mow them down. I'd like to start with something that really is specific to Cayuga County and Auburn, and you touched on it, Ms. Abbott. It's the Owasco Lake watershed and the blooms, the harmful algal blooms that have been plaguing lakes all over the state. But Owasco certainly has seen some bad blooms. This past year was the worst reading for toxins for the raw water coming into the Auburn treatment plant. Fortunately, the plant did its job and removed them, but it certainly heightened the concern about what's going on in the lake itself. So my question for both of you, given what's happening, is what are the types of things you would do as a representative for this county to help deal with the watershed issues?
Okay. We'll start with Senator May and start going back and forth. Senator, you have 2 minutes.
All right, great. Thanks for that question, Jeremy. I really appreciate it because when I'm going door to door, one of the first things I hear from people is how important water quality is in the Finger Lakes, and this district goes all the way up to Lake Ontario as well. So I was on the Onondaga Lake Watershed Partnership before I ran for office, and since I've been in office, I've been on the Environmental Conservation Committee, and I've worked really hard on water quality issues. The first bill I passed in the legislature forbade the creation of incinerators in the Finger Lakes watershed. And I have since then worked on a number of other bills. This summer I introduced 3 bills that are specific to watershed protection. One of them is to require the disclosure of any PFAS discharges, which are forever chemicals that are carcinogens and disrupt the hormonal system. I have a bill to make sure that we're not shipping our water out of state, we're not privatizing our water or public water supply, because I think we're going to have a lot of pressures from people coming in here to want to move here because we have fresh water. And I also introduced a bill to share all the data, because all these watershed organizations, most of them are staffed by volunteers. They don't have big budgets. They are collecting a lot of information, as are citizen scientists, as are universities, as is the DEC. And we need to share all that data. So I think that's the number one thing, to make sure that we have the overall picture so that we can manage these watersheds. And then to bring people to the table. We have to bring farmers to the table, we have to bring homeowners to the table, and we have to bring the watershed organizations to the table. And I think having, oh, sorry, I didn't realize we were out of time.
Thank you, Senator. Legislator Abbott, on this issue of harmful algae blooms and Wasco watershed.
This is my wheelhouse. I chair environmental protection for Onondaga County. I'm on the county's Council for the Environment. I am our DEC Region 7 Fisheries and Wildlife Protection Board member, and I also serve on the county's Soil and Water Conservation District Board. And if you're not familiar with what that does, we help secure grant funding so we can help mitigate runoff from our tribs into our drinking water sources. So we help our ag community, who oftentimes, because of the bureaucracy and the layers of red tape, if you work in partnership with the Owasco Lake Watershed, you know what I'm talking about. We help them garner grants so that we can incentivize being good stewards of our watershed. So one of the things that I would like to do at the state level, it's always this dangling carrot. We would get these press releases from Cuomo and from whoever's in charge. We have all this money for drinking water, okay? I represent Skaneateles Lake, which is the unfiltered water source. We can't afford to lose that designation because nobody's going to want to be able to pay for a filtration treatment plant. So it's important to keep HABs out. No different than Owasco. I also represent Atisco Lake. It is filtered and it's through Aqua. But these are our qualities of life. There are economic drivers through tourism, our sales tax drivers, and they are drinking water sources, so they're critical. And so one of the things I think needs to stop is when you go to garner the funding, they put the funding out. You'll hear it from whoever the governor is or whoever's in charge. It's like jumping through hoops and ripping your hair out to actually garner that money. What you guys are familiar, if you're involved in this effort to mitigate HABs, there are 9 element plans, and it's what they tell you, Department of State, you have to fill out in order to garner that money, and we do it. I secured $100,000 to be able to do it on Skaneateles Lake because by the time the Department of State kicks in the money, we're losing time. It would have been a year, 2 years, they're so backed up. So we put the money up that will be reimbursed eventually because we care and we need to do this now. It's the same thing on Atisco Lake. I just started a 9E plan for them. The county is funding that. I've also just, here's another example of garnering grant money. Okay. So anyway, too much red tape. We need to work now, and it's nice if it's out there, but it's too hard to access.
We'll turn now to Mr. Boyer again.
You mentioned 9 element. We just finished the 9 element plan for Owasco Lake watershed, and really that comprehensive science analysis found that agriculture is by far the biggest contributor to phosphorus loading in the lake, which is the biggest contributor to the issues that develop. Given that finding, what do you do with that? Where do you go? And my question for both of you is do we need more stringent regulations and enforcement on agriculture in these watersheds?
Okay. Legislator Abbott, you're going to go first on this. You have 2 minutes.
Sure. I would say that if you actually go out and visit a farm, you'll see that they are some of the most regulated industries around. One thing that I think that's going to make it absolutely worse is what our senator supported, and that is lowering the overtime threshold for these farmers. I'm going to explain why. When you lower the overtime threshold, which we've learned from a Cornell University study is going to tank our dairy farmers, and we saw this during the pandemic. If you can't process specifically, like let's say the milk, right, and you only have this much time during a day to do that, these farmers can't just dispose of dairy. And a concern I have about that is if you just toss the milk, it gets into the groundwater, it gets into our tribs, and that is a nutrient load for HABs. So I think we need to continue to incentivize and help fund and make these grant monies available to our farm families and support them, as opposed to constantly pointing a finger. Their lands they live here. I can tell you, if you come out and talk to the people I represent, they care deeply about the watershed. And I think if we're going to be divisive and point fingers and crack down, I don't think that's how we incentivize people to work together. So that's where I stand.
Thank you. Senator May, you have 2 minutes on this issue of the farm impact on the watershed.
Yeah, with all due respect, milk is not the issue, it's manure. And that is where we really need to be working with the farmers. I totally agree. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about working with them to make sure that they are managing their manure in ways that doesn't end up polluting the watershed. So that means cover crops. It means incentivizing a lot of different practices, buffer zones, cover crops, all kinds of things that can be good for agriculture, but also good for the watershed. It means developing new opportunities. I was just talking with an assembly member from Ithaca who is working on a proposal for a new kind of biodigester that actually turns the solids from manure into a very effective soil amendment that not only improves fertility, but it also reduces erosion from the soils. And if we can invest in that kind of 21st century technology, we can help the farmers actually produce something of value with their manure and reduce their impact on the watershed. So I think we have to think in those kinds of terms. We have to be honest about what the problem is, and then I think I was going to say before, one of the benefits of this new district is that it puts these lakes into a single Senate district, so that then the senator has the opportunity to bring everybody to the table in the watershed, which I think is an exciting opportunity.
Legislator Abbott, you have 1 minute.
I would love this opportunity. So this is what we're already doing on the soil and water conservation districts. This is what we do. We have to go after grant money to do cover crops. We do our culvert studies, so we can identify where we're not properly funneling runoff. We do innovative things like Cornell. It's like a giant tea bag, okay? You dig it underground and it filters out the phosphorus and everything before it hits our lakes and streams. The problem is there isn't proper funding and there's not access to it, because a lot of times, for example, you're going after a $100,000 grant and the red tape that is required from New York State makes it that you're going to pay $50,000 to get there. So a lot of these grants that are available to our farmers through soil and water conservation districts work, they're disincentivizing applying for it, because it's just like it's not even worth the time and money, and that's not going to meet the end goal. So again, there's too much bureaucracy in New York State. We need to make it easier to access the funds.
Okay.
I don't disagree with that. We have been working hard to make sure that funding is available to people, and that we do reduce some of the barriers to getting the funding.
Okay. Mr. Boyer.
All right. You touched on the farm overtime. I certainly would like to ask about that. Agriculture being really the top industry in Cayuga County, and so I'd like to get your thoughts on two decisions that really have been made in the past few years. The first one was setting a 60-hour overtime standard. Was that appropriate? Was that the right decision? Because farms certainly resisted that and said it was going to cause a lot of problems. But it happened, and here we are today, and now they're talking about, or they've made the decision, the Hochul administration has made the decision over the next 10 years to go from 60 to 40 to be the overtime standard, the threshold. So I'd like both your opinions on first, is 60 a good standard to have? Should there be no threshold for farms? But secondly, then the 60 to 40 move. What do you think of that?
Senator May, you have 2 minutes on this issue of farm hours.
So I'm glad you asked that about the 60 hours, because when I took office, there was a bill that would have immediately reduced it to 40 hours. And I made sure that the sponsor of that bill came up to Central New York, met with farmers here. We held a hearing on the bill at SUNY Morrisville. We had a lot of legislators from all over the state here to hear from farmers and farm workers and people working in the agricultural sector, and neighbors of farms as well, talking about what the impacts of that bill would be. And the downstate legislators really listened and set 60 as the threshold. And I thought that was right. I mean, I support labor. I really think people's work should be rewarded, and farm workers work hard. They work dangerous jobs. They should be paid for their work. And I still believe that. That's why when the governor made this decision over the next many years, slowly to reduce it to 40, that we said, okay, if you're going to do that, we have to make the farmers whole. So we put money in the budget to make sure that the money for paying for the overtime would be refunded to the farmers so that they can afford to hire the workers and pay them the wages that workers deserve. It's dangerous work, as I said, and they deserve to be paid the way other workers are paid.
Thank you, Senator. Legislator Abbott, we're going to ask you about the 60-40 farm hours.
Okay. Snowplow drivers, DPW workers, corrections officers, police officers, they're all dangerous work. We have a workforce issue across central New York, and now we're going to create a problem, I believe, in lowering the threshold to 40 hours. And by the way, you, me, and everybody in this room is going to supplement that. We're going to pay to supplement their decision, and I think it's absolutely egregious. It's exactly why New York State isn't affordable, because of decisions that are being made by Senator May and the downstate Albany. It is not representative of us. And if you come out here and talk to our farmers, our potential constituents, I mean, it's absolutely not the mindset. I mean, that's not what people are talking about in doing this. Let's talk about the fact that our migrant workers are housed, okay? They're housed. They come to our schools. The farmers are paying, they're going to be paying 39% more to heat the housing units this winter. And so, I mean, I don't know how anybody can think that this is going to do anything but what Cornell University study showed, which is cripple our dairy industry. They're not going to be able to compete. I already have a farm in my district in Spafford that is ordering robotics because they see the writing on the wall. I absolutely think it's completely out of touch. I do not support it. 60 hours, okay. And absolutely we need to make sure that our farm workers are treated right. But that dollar here really is worth a lot. And there's other opportunities for those families, opportunities to come and educate your children here. And I just think it's completely ludicrous and misplaced, and it's going to impact our food prices as well.
Okay. Mr. Boyer.
All right, shift gears a little bit and talk about COVID-19. Still around, still exists. And unfortunately, you know, we've just moved into the high community level category here in really all the counties in this district. And that the CDC makes that determination based on cases and hospital usage. And they actually recommend indoor masking under that level. But I think all of us, wherever we go, we're not seeing the level of masking we used to see. So my question is, if the numbers continue to get higher as the fall goes on and we get into winter, if hospital bed availability becomes an issue again, would you support bringing back restrictions into schools and other public indoor spaces, such as masking or vaccine mandates?
Okay, Legislator Abbott, you're up first on this one.
So I think that we have reached our breaking point. I think that we cannot afford to cripple our businesses anymore. We can't afford mental health care the mental health crisis is bad enough. And education and having our kids stay home and not having childcare for parents who use school as such in order to support their families, given the lack of affordability in New York State right now. I think there are other things we can do. I would never have fired nurses for forcing to have a vaccine. I personally think we should be incentivizing. If that's what state leaders think we should do, then incentivize people, our healthcare workers, to get that vaccine. We have a nursing shortage, and now you punish these people? I think it should have been a tax credit if you get it, or make people test every day. If that's the standard, at least you don't lose your job, and now the rest of us are paying for unemployment for this person who the state has ripped their job away. So I think it would depend on the level of data at that point. So to put it out there and say definitively, I can't answer that because we're not there, but I can tell you, I don't think we can afford to lose any more New Yorkers. We are number one in the nation in leading the mass exodus of people, and it is not the weather, because California is number two. Our leaders need to wake up and understand people can't afford to live here. Stop voting against good things like when we're downtrodden, fully repealing the gas tax, even if it's for a year or 2 years. What are we getting? How are you doing? How's it going for you in New York State? I can be a fresh choice for you. I understand Central New York, and I want to be your strong voice.
Thank you, Legislator. We'll now hear from Senator May on this issue of COVID-19 restrictions.
Well, it's a very difficult question because people are tired. People are tired of wearing masks. They're tired of social distancing, all of that. It's hard to go back to that. I think what we have now that is an advantage is that most people are vaccinated, and so that makes the mortality rate much lower and maybe the necessity of masking lower. But if, as you pointed out, if we did get to a point where our hospitals couldn't accommodate people because so many people were getting seriously ill, that's when you have to start thinking about public health measures that might have to be taken. I think there's a lot of evidence coming out now that the disinformation about vaccination that was supported at very high levels in the Trump administration has hampered our ability to get out of this pandemic and really move on, and that is a shame. But I think people are starting to recognize vaccination has been helpful. And most people are surviving because they have been vaccinated. And so I hope that that is the direction we're going in, that people are recognizing basic public health requirements and needs.
Okay. Before turning over to you, Mr. Boyer, just to let our viewers know, we're a little short of halfway through our 48th Senate District Forum, which is a new district created through redistricting through the 2020 census. It includes all of Cuyahoga County, parts of Onondaga County, including the city of Syracuse and the village of Skaneateles. We're very happy to have in the studio two of the three candidates running this November for the November 8th election. Senator Rachel May, who is on the Democratic and Working Families Party line, and Onondaga County Legislator Julie Abbott, who's on the Republican line. Their third opponent, Justin Carini, was not able to attend today because of work commitments, and he did alert us to that in the beginning. They are both being asked questions by the executive editor of The Citizen, Jeremy Boyer. Timing is being done by Ian, one of our second-year students here at the college, and we'll continue on with Mr. Boyer with your next question.
Okay. We'll talk now. The next question is going to be about abortion, and it's interesting because it's a question I haven't asked at every state legislature forum over the years, just because it was a federal Supreme Court precedent that really made it not necessarily an issue that the state legislature would deal with. But we've now had that decision that came down last summer that really gives the power of the states to decide what to do with abortion. My question for both of you is, abortion access in New York State. What changes, if any, would you support related to that?
Okay. Senator May, you're up first with 2 minutes on this issue of abortion.
So let me come back to your premise of your question, because when I took office in 2019, we passed the Reproductive Health Act and the Comprehensive Contraceptive Coverage Act, which had been blocked for decades by the Republican leadership in the Senate. So it does matter who is in the majority in the legislature, and we can't take for granted that New York has the protections that New Yorkers want, because we know that at the federal level, there are Republican leaders calling for a federal ban on abortions, and that would affect New York State as well. So we need to pass the Equal Rights Amendment that we passed once this summer. We have to pass it a second time, and then the voters have to ratify it in order to put into the Constitution protections for pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes. I support those, and I have supported a number of measures that we've taken since the Supreme Court took its absolutely radical action to overturn precedent. We put in place protections for doctors who perform abortions on pregnant women who come from other states, for example, and allowing people to travel across our borders to come here for abortion. So I think there are some things that we've been doing, and I'm proud of that.
Okay, thank you, Senator. We'll now hear from Legislator Abbott on this issue of abortion in New York.
Yes, so I'm a mom of 5 boys. As I mentioned earlier, I lost a child. I value life, and I'm also a woman, and I don't think there's anything more conservative than not wanting the government to tell a female what she can and can't do with her body. I believe there are circumstances, medical, in the case of a certain criminal act, where there may warrant an abortion, or there might be a decision by somebody where they medically need to do this, or for another purpose in an early stage, in a first trimester. I am not for late-term abortions unless there is something medically that's could affect a parent, and so that's where I stand on this. I do not think, I think we can barely take care of ourselves in New York State budget-wise right now. They just added $27.5 billion. This is over 2 years, record budgets that my opponent has supported. I just don't think that we should be funding out-of-state abortions when we can barely fund ourselves. And so I would like us to stay within, I think, to be able to fund pregnancy education and provide, contraception. I think that is a really smart thing that we can do to ward off unwanted pregnancies. And I also have to point out, and I don't want to, squash the larger issue, which is what came out of the federal ruling, that we might be going backwards in the world of women's rights. It's codified into law here. Nothing's going to change in New York State with that federal ruling. So,
thank you, Mr. Boyer. Do you have?
I will just say it's in law, but if we have a different governor, a different leadership in the legislature, that could change, and that's why we need to put it into the Constitution. I have a 24-year-old daughter. I'm doing this for her as much as for anyone else. I don't think that she should be having her decisions made for her by a radical Supreme Court.
You have 1 minute if you wish to use it.
I guess I would just say there's a lot of extreme things that come out of one-party rule when you have no checks and balances down in Albany, and it is the law, and I think that's enough. I do. There are pieces of the Women's Reproductive Health Care Act that I don't agree with. The fact that if you're menstruating at age 12, you can go in and have an abortion without parental consent. As a mom, you can't drive till you're 16. You can't vote until you're 18. And at 21, you can drink. Why there's no parental consent? There could have been a crime that a parent would want to know about, but that's the radical left. And it's not where I sit. So I think we're in a good situation now.
Mr. Boyer.
All right. Another controversial piece of legislation, actually there's been a couple, but more recently the concealed carry law that was passed in the special session this past year put some restrictions on where concealed weapons can be taken in New York State, and requiring some extra background checks for concealed carry permits, and that was in response to a Supreme Court decision that struck down New York's older law. So my question about that for both of you, it's really, you each get a question because you voted to support that. So just tell us why you did support that, and what would your vote have been, Ms. Abbott, if you were in the legislature at the time?
Okay, so we're going to go with Ms. Abbott first, because then we'll go back and forth. And If you have a follow-up, you may have that.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Would you have supported that legislation?
Unequivocally, no. I think it's a political Band-Aid during an election year, which, I mean, if you look at law-abiding citizens who are getting their permits and doing everything they need to do, registering their guns, that's not the problem. The problem is illegal guns on the streets. The problem is we have a mental health care crisis, and we have a drug crisis here. So I think it's completely misplaced. And in the seat I sit in on the Onondaga County Legislature, and you can ask your local municipal leaders, it puts us yet again in this willy-nilly. I sat through budget hearings and heard it from our sheriff. I heard it from the district attorney. Here you go, municipalities. We decide this in New York State. There's no guidance. We're going to not fund anything. Go for it. Okay, so it's just, to me, it's mass. I don't like policies that distract from really coming to a solution. And that's what I think this is. And you're punishing people who have a Second Amendment right to have a gun. I don't own a gun. It's not my thing, but I believe in the Constitution. And if you're legally you're legally registering and you've done your safety courses and you've done everything you need to do, why are we going to punish you?
Okay, Senator May, on this issue of the concealed carry legislation and why you would have supported it.
So New York State has one of the lowest rates of gun violence per capita in the nation. And that has been in part because we have strong gun laws. And one of them was a concealed carry law that made sure that you couldn't go into, say, a movie theater or a school playground or a lot of public spaces with a concealed weapon. And once again, the radical right-wing Supreme Court decided to take away New York's right to have that law and to overturn it. And we needed to act quickly because otherwise we were going to start seeing concealed weapons in some of those very sensitive places where most New Yorkers don't want concealed weapons. So we passed a law, and I supported it because we had to act quickly. Now, I did recognize there were some issues, and some of those have been taken up in court, but a lot of what we passed is still in the law. And I think it's protecting New Yorkers who really want to make sure that we are a state where people don't have to worry about guns just being, everyone sitting next to you is packing heat. I just think that was the right thing to do.
Legislator Abbott, you have 1 minute on this as a follow-up.
I just think you create more divide with law-abiding citizens when you go after them and don't tackle the real problem. I mean, what a threat. My school resource officer, former trooper, that's coming home from work and stops at Burned Dairy, but he can't go in because he happens to have a concealed carry permit and his gun on him. Really? That's going to solve the problem? Gun violence in Syracuse. We heard this from our district attorney in Onondaga County during our budget hearings 3 weeks ago. It's up over 55% from last year, gun violence, crime with injury, since criminal justice reform. At what point we're going to stop and analyze and say, you know what, we made a mistake, let's fix some of these things? If I go down there, that's what you're going to see from me.
I'm sorry, this is the kind of misinformation we've been hearing all the time. It has nothing to do with the reforms that we passed. And we have been working on getting ghost guns out, which are one of the biggest problems in terms of street violence with guns. We passed some really important legislation to make it harder to bring guns across the border, which is the big problem in New York. It's the iron pipeline from southern states, from Pennsylvania, from Ohio, coming across the border into New York. And we have been working very hard to try to stop that trafficking in illegal weapons that has been what is the source of the problem.
Did you want another minute?
I could speak. Actually, I was going to go off to bail reform, but that's no. I'm good. I think my position.
Mr. Boyer, something tells me that's going to be the next subject.
Appreciate it.
So nice lead in, by the way.
The more we can get questions in, the more ground we can cover. I hope. Anyway, I do have a question for what we could call the criminal justice reform laws. As a bunch, we have the bail reform law, the evidence discovery rules, raise the age. All three had intentions behind them, and now there's been a large debate about how successful they've been. So my question for both of you is, what's your position on whether these changes were needed? Did we need to address some of the issues that they said they were meant to address? And secondly, what changes should be made, or should there be just full-out repeal?
Okay, so on this issue of the trifecta of three pieces of legislation, Senator May, you get to go first.
So raise the age was taken up before I got into office, but the bail reform laws were passed in my first year in office. New York at that time had the most punitive bail laws in the country. We were putting people in jail for years on misdemeanor charges without trial, and without being allowed to know what the evidence was against them. And sometimes it would take 8, 10 months, 2 years for that they were sitting in jail without any resolution at all for a crime that, if they were convicted of it, might have a 3-month sentence. So it was not just wrong and unfair, it was deeply unjust, and it was targeting communities of color in particular and tearing families apart, causing a lot of the concentrated poverty and child poverty that we have seen in a lot of communities in this state. And even district attorneys and sheriffs, a lot of people, judges, recognized that the system was broken, and we had the courage to make changes to it. Immediately after we passed those laws, there were attacks that were really unfounded and purely political. And we are seeing now that we can actually see some of the data about the results of particularly the bail reforms that we passed, that in fact, all of those scare stories that you've been hearing, they really aren't true. It has not increased the number of rearrests. It has not increased the percentage of people who are not showing up for trial. It actually has had the effect that we wanted, that people are able to keep their jobs, keep their homes, keep custody of their kids, where you don't have kids going into foster care at very large numbers. It is, in many ways, working.
Thank you, Senator May. Legislator, on this issue of the 3 pieces of legislation.
I would say, how safe do you feel in your neighborhood? How is it going to the mall? Crime is up. We have had Democrat judges in the city of Syracuse, in my county, okay, who have said, this is a problem we have to reverse. And even though some of the things were taken back in regards to cashless bail, endangering the welfare of a child, you could deal fentanyl to a child and you're bail eligible. Child pornography, these things are, they're get out of jail free cards right now. And I personally think it was well intended. I hear what the senator is saying, but sometimes we're human, and when you make an error, it is your job to turn around and say, we made a mistake. I want to talk about discovery for a second. We can't keep district attorneys in our county. There's no money behind it. It would be like if you work at Wegmans, okay, and I come into you as your boss, New York State, to our counties, okay, and say, oh, by the way, no money, no staff, and we require this of you, which means you're going to work 7 days a week to do the paperwork, to turn around the discovery. And it really has people running for the hills. It's created a huge problem, morale and staffing-wise, with our district attorney's offices. And I think sometimes you really need to talk to the people before we go and make these decisions. The HALT Act is another one. Did you see how many prison guards a couple months ago were attacked in Cayuga County? And it's because you're creating this anti-police environment. And, and I feel like they get things thrown on them at their job that you don't even want to know and think about it. And it's because we're creating with this rhetoric, we're siding with people who have an arrest record, and we're harming law-abiding citizens and people just trying to do their jobs. And I think it's a mess, to be honest with you.
Thank you.
Well, I will say we listened, and there were some immediate changes that we made because, for example, the nonviolent crimes that the law was intended to cover, there were some crimes that weren't classified as nonviolent crimes, but people understood them to be violent crimes. And we made some of those changes as we went along. But the increase in crime that we have seen is real, and I get it. People are really scared, but it isn't about bail reform. It's happening all over the country. It's happening in lots of states where they did not make any changes. And if we are going to address that, we have to look with clear eyes at what the policies are. It's addressing poverty. It's addressing mental illness. It's addressing substance abuse. And making sure that families can be supported and be whole. And I think that those are the policies we need to pursue and that we're trying to pursue to address this issue.
Ms. Abbott, you'll have 1 minute as well.
I would completely agree with the senator on needing a comprehensive long-term plan for dealing with mental health care. Even being able to have mental health providers, because we don't in our communities. You know this if you need to go get help for a child or a family member or a friend. At the same token, you are endorsed by the Working Families Party. You're on their line, and they outwardly support defunding our police. And I think that's a major problem. I sat and listened to our sheriff. We had 2 deputies coming out of work, just they're off duty, okay, on a Wednesday night in uniform, and they're attacked. They were attacked and sent to the hospital. This environment is not okay for people that are they're just trying to do their jobs and protect the public.
Senator, you have 1 minute, and
Okay.
Ms. Abbott will have 1 minute.
We are actually funding the police more than we were funding them before. There is no movement to defund, but what there is, and it's supported by a majority of people on both sides of the aisle, is shifting resources toward mental health, responding to mental health emergencies in ways that maybe don't involve an armed officer coming. Shifting the responses to the kinds of issues that law enforcement officers are responding to into much more sensitive and thoughtful community policing ways. And people support that. And the rhetoric that you hear is getting in the way of our being able to actually make the changes that I think people want to see.
Legislator Abbott, you have 1 minute.
Yes, so the rhetoric and the reality is we can't find people to enter our police academies. The rhetoric, it's the truth that we're not able to recruit people like we used to. You used to have graduating classes in the sheriffs in double digits. You can look at Auburn police. It's the same thing. You go talk to your local leaders and see how many funded vacant positions are in their budgets. And it's a field people don't want to go in because, quite frankly, we've seen the movement. It is real.
Mr. Boyer, we have at least time for one question, maybe a short question, but you can do a regular question, then we'll follow up.
All right, we'll see how this goes. Big decision at the top of the ticket is governor. I'd like to get your thoughts. I imagine I know what your answer is who you will vote for governor. What I'd like to hear from you is why you would back that person and what major concerns you have about the person who you would not vote for. I'm talking about the 2 major party candidates, Governor Kathy Hochul and her challenger, Representative Lee Zeldin.
Legislator Abbott, you're up first.
I support Lee Zeldin. We have seen out of our Democrat governors, from Cuomo to Kathy Hochul now, scandal after scandal. You had the lieutenant governor who we back, everybody's so happy, and then, what happened with him. We're reading now about the slush money that was thrown in the budget at the end because it's an election year so that Kathy Hochul can go ahead and buy herself votes. That's not okay. It's not okay. I support Lee because he supports 2 main things that I think are completely out of touch with Senator May and the Dems that are controlling everything in Albany right now. And that is affordability and cutting taxes versus continuing to add programming without evaluating and assessing what can't we do? What can't we afford? When you budget at your house, you might want a new pool, right? But can you afford it? And there's no regard to a lot of these policies coming out of here anymore. And the second thing I'm deeply concerned about, we just talked about, and that is crime. And I do believe that Lee Zeldin would, along with Allison Esposito, who I think she is fantastic, the lieutenant governor candidate, they would stop and look at safety and analyze how criminal justice reform with a real plan, how that is impacting and the policies and what needs to change so that our daily lives are better. And upstate is not represented. All of these decisions are influenced by downstate, and that has to change.
Thank you, Legislator. Senator, not so much who you're going to vote for, but why you are voting for them and your concerns about the opposition party candidates.
Kathy Hochul has been a tremendous governor for upstate, and she is of upstate. She understands, she comes through here all the time, and we have worked with her really well. And I think what we saw with the Micron announcement is the best example of how her efforts to spur development upstate are paying off. And I think we in the legislature have worked with her on that. We were able to get infrastructure funding like we've never seen upstate. We've been able to fund our schools, fully fund our schools. In the next budget, we will get to the point where our schools are fully funded. We will be supporting refugees. This was something they were really neglected, but refugees are very important to our upstate cities and our upstate economy. And Micron specifically said the diverse workforce was something that they were excited about having. It was a reason they wanted to come here. The funding she put in the budget, and we are trying to fight for water infrastructure, is another thing that is absolutely key to our whole region. My opponent talks about cutting taxes, but she has refused to say what she would cut out of the budget. And I think these investments we are making are actually paying off, and we're going to end up with a much larger tax base, with a larger population upstate, and with a really transformed economy for the better up here. And that's Kathy Hochul. On the other side is Lee Zeldin, who didn't even vote for to certify the results of the election in 2020. He's a dangerous man and doesn't believe in our democracy. And so I think it's a clear choice.
Thank you. Legislator Abbott, you have 1 minute.
Great. So in terms of cutting things, we rescinded an energy tax in less than a year when we realized in Onondaga County that during the pandemic, we were okay. So we pulled ours back. I would challenge the senator to rescind the energy tax surcharges to offset your and my home heating costs that is expected to go up 39% this winter. Why not? Why did you vote 5 times to not fully repeal New York's gas tax? Just give us a break. Not only did we do that in Onondaga County, our county executive came to the legislature with one number, and we said, you know what? We can do better, and that's what we pass. That's what we do. Let's talk Micron. I was on planning and economic development. I have been in that boardroom with Ryan McMahon when all of the Dems in a party line vote voted against the infrastructure we needed to provide to even be in the running. That's what I do, and that's what we do in Onondaga County under our leadership. And I'm sorry, I appreciate the across the aisle. I actually love the collaboration, and I think it's where we need to be, right back in the middle for real people. But I also think it's pathetic that we had to change a law and actually push a boulder uphill because we are so business unfriendly in New York State. We couldn't compete otherwise.
Thank you, Legislator. You'll have, okay. Then we're finished with Mr. Boyer's portion of the forum. Mr. Boyer, thank you for your questions. We'll see you back here on Thursday for our next forum. But we're now going to have both candidates make their closing statements. As we said, we flipped a coin at the beginning of this, before the show. Legislator Abbott, who is on the Republican line, will give her 2-minute closing first. Great. And then Senator May. Please.
So I would like to just say, when you go to the grocery store and you go to fill your gas tank and you go anywhere nowadays, how's it going for you? When are we going to see real money of ours coming back to us? And if you're sick of the divide and the divisiveness that we're seeing around the nation, I'm your girl. Meet me in the middle. You can see out of my legislative work and what we're doing in Onondaga County that we are on the forward edge of bringing business here. We did that with the help from other people, but I'm sorry, that's our badge to carry. And so I also have to point out that I don't think Senator May deserves to go back there. I'm going to bring it up because you chaired the aging committee. You never subpoenaed Cuomo, and people were calling on you to do this, and it was your responsibility when we were in a nursing home scandal, putting the most sick people into our most vulnerable population in nursing homes. You failed, and on that level, I don't think that you should have the opportunity to go back. And so I'm a workhorse. Give me a chance. I can be a strong voice for upstate.
Thank you, Legislator. We'll now hear from Senator Rachel May, who is on the Democratic and Working Families line. Senator.
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity and for the great questions and the great discussion. This has been really, really illuminating, I think, for the voters. I am very proud of the work that I've done, and as I said before, I will respond that as chair of the Aging Committee, I was the first one to call for hearings. I was the first one to call for Governor Cuomo to resign out of the Democrats because I was concerned about that. But that's because as a Democrat, I believe in holding both Democrats and Republicans accountable. Accountability, transparency, these have been really important things to me in government, and making sure that voters have the opportunity to have their voices heard, to know their votes are being counted. That was all very important to me when I took office. I think we have put upstate in a better position, and the Micron decision is an indication of that we are on track to really improve our local economy, to bring a lot of people here. And we need to be laying the foundation. We need to be making the investments that I have helped secure in the budget to our roads and bridges, to our water infrastructure, to our schools and colleges, so that we have the 21st century economy here, the green economy, we're fighting climate change, we're doing all of the things that make New York, and upstate New York in particular, the place to be as we move farther into the 21st century. So I look forward to continuing to serve this district for 2 more years. Thank you.
We want to thank you both for your time. Thanks for being in the studio. Thanks for addressing this community. For the 48th Senate District, as we said, your opponent, Mr. Corelli, was not able to attend because of work commitments. But we do appreciate all 3 of you going out there and campaigning. It's not always easy on yourselves and, more importantly, your families. And good luck in the next several weeks as you go through. And it is always a standing invitation. Whoever is representing this district is always welcome in this studio here at the college. And again, we want to thank Mr. Boyer for his questions, thoughtful as always. And we want to thank you, our viewers, for taking the time over the last hour to listen to the candidates for the 48th Senate District. As it's been said, this is the first time in a decade that Cuyahoga County will be in one full legislative district, Senate district. And so we encourage you to go exercise your right to vote on November 8th. The Citizen on their website, auburnpub.com, will have these forums online tonight, and you can view them on that site. They can also be seen live on YouTube by going to Media Cayuga. Quick programming note for you. We'll be back on Thursday with the candidates for the 126th Assembly Forum. That is with incumbent John Lamondes, who's on the Republican line seeking re-election against Democrat Bruce McBain. Until Thursday, I'm Guy Cosentino from Cayuga Community College and the Citizen. We want to thank you for watching. We look forward to having you back in your living rooms on Thursday. Have a good evening.